Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 26th of August 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're joined by a live video Skype link by David Scott with Northern Exposure. Well, we've got a glorious day in Plymouth, so I think we're going to shout about it. Don't know whether it's going to last for the bank holiday weekend, but we hope so. And I've got quite a few good weather reports from across the country, so maybe a nice weekend. Well, we're going to just kick off with this remarkable article which the Independent has produced, and what they're saying is that there's been a release of documents from the National Archives which now show without any doubt that Israel was supplying the Argentine government with weapons at the height of the Falklands War. This is a very interesting article because this was well known anyway, but the Independent's chosen to make a very big thing about it. I just thought we would remind ourselves that if the Israeli weapons were killing British military in 1982, by 2014 we've got David Cameron locking us in to a complete collaboration with Israeli intelligence and a spying network for which the British public has still not had any in-depth explanation of why this is necessary. So, extraordinary situation at the moment that we're locked into a defence pact with the French, we're locked into an intelligence services pact with Israel, but we're not too sure whether Israel is hostile to UK or not. How do you explain this, Mike?
Yeah, what can you say?
Some of it will come down to money, I'm sure.
Okay, so let's get on to money and net fiscal balance 2015 to 16. David, this is to do with Scotland, of course. This is the difference in the text here. It says this is the difference between the total revenue and total public sector expenditure, including capital investment. The net fiscal balance, excluding North Sea revenue, was a deficit of £14.9 billion, which is 10% of GDP. You say here that including an illustrative geographic share of North Sea revenue, it was a deficit of £14.8 billion. And for the UK, it was a deficit of £75.3 billion, which is 4% of GDP. Give us a bit more on this, then.
Yes, well, the first takeaway is that North Sea oil no longer constitutes a significant part of the Scottish government budget. As you reported earlier in the week, North Sea revenues have declined by 97% and are now quite trivial and almost make no difference whether you include them in the figures or not. Now, the most significant and broad-ranging point is that the deficit, the government spending deficit that we're facing an independent Scotland is catastrophic. 9.5% of GDP is not in any way sustainable. But the GDP is a strange denominator and really conceals as much as it illustrates. Far more relevant is to compare it to total government revenues. Now, the total government revenues is for Scotland something like 42 billion. That's what the HMRC take in from all sources, VAT, income tax, the lot, including a geographical split of North Sea oil revenues. Now that means that the deficit is 35% of Scottish government revenues. 35%, more than a third, is just borrowed. Now, as part of the UK, we obviously have borrowing costs of almost nothing. That would not be the case for a smaller nation, particularly one without its own long-established currency. And the only solution to that, and the solution that the Nationalist administration will not face and cannot face because of their socialist ideology, the only possible solution is that, yes, Scotland could be a successful independent country, but in order to do so, we would need to cut the state by at least 40%.
Okay, the next one we've got here then is HMRC receipts, which are £42 billion.
Yes, so that's how much the Scottish, the hard-working Scots actually contribute to the exchequer. So there is a lot of money coming out of here, and it's every bit as high in England. It just shows how much the English figure is 445 billion. So it shows you how much the HMRC steal, if that's really what it is, steal from the country or siphon off. And we have reached, throughout the Western world, we've reached peak tax. They essentially steal as much as they can. If they put tax rates up, the take goes down, the revenue stream goes down. So they've essentially taxed everything possible. And this is as much money as they can get out of the country. It's a very substantial amount, but it doesn't cover the spending. It doesn't cover the spending for Britain as a whole, but even more so in Scotland with its excessive public sector, it doesn't come remotely close to covering the amount of spending that's going on.
Okay, and then if we compare that with Greece, EU Commission calls into question the Greek budget deficit figures.
Can you believe that the Greek budget deficit figures might not be entirely reliable?
I would have thought they must be absolutely correct. Everything about the European Union is always correct. I mean, they have fully audited accounts for themselves, so they must be in the position to criticise any nation state.
Well, that's a fair point. Yes, the EU is unable to audit its accounts, but the Greeks do have a certain amount of previous on this. In fact, when they were in a currency union way back in the 20s and 30s, they got thrown out for fiddling the figures. So there you go. But it's interesting to look at just where Greece is. In terms of the general budget deficit, it's actually far better than Scotland. In fact, if you take off debt repayment, they're actually running a surplus, a small surplus. The problem with the Greek situation is the debt is astronomical and growing. It's 180% of GDP, which cannot be paid back. They're now paying something like 12% for government debt, whereas in Britain we're paying anything, 0.5%, 0.25%, 1 or 2%, even if you go out to 30 years. We're getting our money extremely cheaply. If we were paying the sort of debt, that repayment interest that Greece is being forced to pay, then the situation across the UK would be every bit as catastrophic as it is in Greece right now. So when Nicola Sturgeon was interviewed some time ago by Andrew Neil, and he compared Scotland and Greece, she viewed that as being a calumny, just quite a ridiculous comparison because of the strength of the Scottish economy compared to the hopeless Greeks. It's not quite as simple as that. The debt position here is much better, the unemployment position here is much better, but in terms of a bloated state spending too much money, we are worse than the Greeks.
And finally then on this section, federal government receipts showing that tax receipts in the United States seem to be collapsing at the moment.
Well, this is a very interesting thing. This came from Mike Maloney, a very intelligent and always interesting commentator on matters economic. And I encourage people to seek out his YouTube channel. Now, he points out this chart, which I can't see, but I'm hoping you're showing. This chart shows the year-on-year 12-month rolling government receipts are collapsing, and collapsing in a way which historically has generally signalled the onset of a significant recession. And his suggestion here is that the United States economy may already be in recession. Now, recession, the technical definition is 2 quarters of falling GDP. So it's a lagging indicator by definition. You don't know until a certain amount of time has elapsed. But he's suggesting that when we have all the data in, we might look back to late summer, early autumn, and conclude that this is when the United States economy, which is reputedly the engine of growth for the entire world, well, that's what we used to be told many years ago, is in fact already in recession. And this is what we have to remember as we look at the GERS figures, as we look at the British government finances, which are not as bad as the Scottish government finances, but are still pretty awful. we have to remember that we're due another recession. This, Mike, you may have noticed, or you may have not noticed, this is the good times. This is the boom before the bust. The bust is coming. Another recession is coming. In fact, it is overdue. There's a lot of evidence to suggest it's at the door. And there's no ammunition left in central government and central bank stores to actually do much about it.
Well, that leads us quite nicely into something we were talking about yesterday, which was this Handelsblatt article, and where they were basically alleging that the European Central Bank is wreaking havoc on the entire financial system, and this was complaints from Deutsche Bank and other European hedge funds that monetary policy is now running counter to the aims of strengthening the economy and making the European banking system safer. And we also pointed out that the European Central Bank themselves are effectively saying that they're going to get even more extreme with monetary policy if governments don't start. I mean, this is the type of tactic that has been used over the decades by the IMF with third world countries, and now we have the European Central Bank basically saying if the governments of the European Union do not do what they say, that they're going to make their monetary policy even more extreme. And then we have this little article from Misconduct, where they're basically saying, or they're asking the question, how long will it take for the European Central Bank to end up owning all sovereign debt of Spain, Germany, and France? And what they have identified from their graph is that that the European Central Bank will own all sovereign debt issued by Spain within 9 years, and by Germany in slightly less time. So this is a fascinating situation where quantitative easing is causing the central bank to hold all the debt of a nation state, in fact 3 in this case, and to give an impression of the sheer desperation of central banks at the moment, this is the annual central bankers gathering in Wyoming, and it's the Federal Reserve Symposium on Economics. It's taking place this week, and their main sort of discussion point is designing resilient monetary policy frameworks for the future. So really what they're saying is that their monetary policy framework that they're using, the whole business of inflation having to be kept around the 2% mark, for example, that isn't working, that quantitative easing they're recognizing is reaching, well, it's long past its sell-by date. They basically have no more tools in the box, as you say, David, and therefore they're going to attempt to change the rules. The insanity of these people is it's just growing exponentially, and you know, as you say, this can really only end in tears, can't it?
Oh, it can end in tears. It will end in tears. It's not quite the sort of policy, though, that the IMF imposed on Africa. It's really entirely new. In the entire history of the world, this has never been tried.
Oh, sure, but the point I was making, David, was that it was the idea of holding nations to ransom by the financial elite. So what the ECB is saying to the nation states is, you will implement these following economic policies, or we are going to become more extreme with our monetary policy. So what you're saying is right. That is absolutely untried in a sense. But the point I'm making is that where the IMF have gone to third world countries and said, you will implement the following economic policies or else, this is what the ECB is doing. This is the threat that they're holding over governments at the moment.
Yes, but I think the difference is or else what? Because this has got all of the threat of the sheriff on blazing saddles about it. Because what exactly are they going to do? Or else we'll print even more free money, or else we'll have, you know, negative interest rates, or more negative interest rates, or more quantitative easing.
Well, they're basically threatening to bring the system down, aren't they?
Maybe. I think one of the problems here is nobody actually knows what they're doing anymore. I mean, this isn't in the playbook. You know, people talk about extreme Keynesianism and crude Keynesianism, but even that doesn't cover it, because unlimited money printing, the fact that we have now naked monetization of debt, where the central banks are just buying all the government debt because no one else is in the market, which is essentially what's happening. It's been put through a couple of middlemen, but that's essentially the bottom line. It certainly is in Japan as well. How does this end? It can only end in one way, which is a currency crisis, where nobody believes the currency is real anymore. You have a crack-up boom, and then everything's wiped out. So remember that cover from The Economist where it was 2018 and a new gold-backed currency? We're still looking as though that could be prophetic. It's a very, very strange time. Nothing that they're doing makes any sense. Nothing has a rationale. And mostly what's happening is pretense and acting and some sort of giant international confidence trick where the people, the actual productive part of the economy, are being fooled into making the wrong decisions so that the central bankers, the financiers and the politicians can have another year or maybe two before they have to pay for the mistakes.
Yes, okay. Well, let's just mention this article in Prospect magazine because perhaps it gives a little bit of perspective on this. What they're saying is that the city will decline. This is a result of Brexit, they're saying. They're saying that the City of London owes much of its current awe-inspiring... they're saying that basically the City of London is providing huge tax receipts into Britain, that we should really be extremely happy that it's there, that the financial system is doing a huge amount for us, but that Brexit, of course, may see it being thrown out of the single market, which would mean that that much of that they would basically be gutted from the inside, is what they're saying. So they're saying that it's bleak news, not just for the city, but for the national economy. London's financial sector is a huge generator of tax receipts, 66.5 billion in tax per year. And that's equivalent, they say, to almost 2/3 of the national education budget. Well, I've got to say, David, in light of what we've just been discussing, we'd probably be better off without it.
Well, yes, because they're talking about a huge benefit to Britain, but it's not really Britain. It's a huge benefit to the government, and we are not the government, and the government are not us. What are they doing with all this tax money? I would argue that what they're doing is dividing us and looting us in large and small ways, that what they're doing is not for our benefit. In fact, ultimately, it's toxic. So the more it's fed through the City of London, ultimately the worse our position will be if we were forced to have a much more outward-looking, productive, efficient trading economy, the sort of thing that this country was built on several hundred years ago. Perhaps those tough times would in fact allow us to make more progress. But with the money flowing into the City of London, fake money, strange, funny money from strange devices like derivatives, it allows the whole system to keep going, keep struggling on. So the structural problems, the problem with the capital structure, the problem with the type of capital, the type of infrastructure, the type of investment we have in the country, no longer matching the marketplace that's available for our goods. Those sorts of problems are not addressed. They're papered over because we have some more welfare payments, or we have some more government programs, or we have some more free-flowing spending of printed money, so that the problems don't get addressed and are instead left for tomorrow. But tomorrow they'll be worse, and there'll be one tomorrow where they will no longer be covered by money printing.
Yes.
Well, David, that's a perfect introduction to this supposed headline story from the BBC about cuts in the NHS. NHS cuts planned across England. Worth going to have a look at this, but we're going to take you through what's really going on with the BBC article. So we've got a Nigel Edwards from the Nuffield Trust, head of the Nuffield Trust, saying the speed of the process to shape these plans has meant that they have so far not been very visible. That's a very nice way of saying we haven't bothered to make them visible because we don't want the public to know. And what we're back on is this subject, this topic of hypnotic language, the use of sustainability and transformation, so-called STPs, sustainability and transformation plans. Apparently, in some cases, large numbers of patients would have to be shifted into community settings. I don't know what they are, Mike, because they're getting rid of the community hospitals to make room for growing demand, while in others up to 20% of beds may be closed. And in the article, they're talking about hospitals being closed, wards being closed, and a reduction in all NHS facilities. And then we come on to this gentleman, David Pearson, STP leader, Nottingham. This is fundamentally about making sure we're doing the best things across Nottinghamshire and that, as far as possible, services are locally delivered to an agreed understanding of what best practice is. So I look at that little quote there and I say once again, well, what is this gentleman actually saying? Well, let's put it against an NHS England context. And we've got another quote here. What is it? This is a unique exercise in collaboration. It's hardly a secret that the NHS is looking to make major efficiencies, and the best way of doing so is for local doctors, hospitals and councils to work together to decide the way forward in consultation with local communities. So what's happening here under this smokescreen of the hypnotic language is that we are now rapidly forcing all of our medical provision together in one massive blob with local authorities and other so-called healthcare providers. And we just focused on this man. We could have looked at other people, but here's Mr. Pearson. Just have a look at his responsibilities. He's already Corporate Director of Adult Social Care, Health and Public Protection, and Deputy Chief Executive of Nottingham County Council. So this man's got a huge workload, but he's coping with it. And this is fundamental about making sure we're doing the best things across Nottinghamshire and that, as far as possible, NHS services are locally delivered to an agreed understanding of what best practice is. What does that actually mean, Mike?
Don't know.
It's very difficult, isn't it? And so we've got the NHS having a massive cut in funds, 100 billion basic budget, chaos throughout the whole NHS. But what we see is a rise in this very strange management language. But Mr. Pearson is not only taking on those jobs, he's also got more. But we had to pop across to Australia to see what he was up to. This is the Australian ageing agenda. They're very concerned they're going to have too many of those nasty old people in Australia, and I think they're looking at humane ways to get rid of them, Mike. But this is ADAS, Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, and Mr. Pearson is boss of that organisation. It represents a mere 152 directors who purchase or provide over half the care services for the population of England. So this man is not only public sector, he's directly helping the corporatisation of the NHS, and he's doing it on a massive scale. Well, where does this stem from? Let's have a look at NHS England, and here we are, health and high quality care for all, now and for future generations. This is the hypnotic language, and what are they having to say? Well, they've got an advert here for sustainability and transformation leaders. I'm sorry about the blue spot there. I'm not sure where that's come from. But basically senior figures from across healthcare who will be leading work on sustainability and transformation plans within their footprint areas have been confirmed. So we've got some pretty impressive selected leaders. You can see all these people on the sites. Some of them are sirs, some of them are doctors, but they're in charge of huge swathes of our healthcare provision. Unfortunately, we did notice in a couple of places they haven't been able to find any leaders. So Cornwall a little bit short of leaders there, Mike. But here they are, chosen not appointed, and these are the people putting this transformation agenda across.
Is that because Common Purpose has closed down in Devon and Cornwall?
Well, I think, Mike, we can joke about the closing down of Common Purpose offices, but the Common Purpose hypnotic agenda, this is the reframing of individuals so they can't use common sense, they can't think for themselves. This is now on a massive scale through a number of other agencies. But this is the real scam of the article, and it brings us back to 38 Degrees, because it was the organisation 38 Degrees that claims it bust this story, our NHS secret plans investigation. So 38 Degrees pumps the story into the BBC, and the BBC responds by quoting 38 Degrees as if this was an innocent comment from Laura Townsend, who is it's the head of the media team in 38 Degrees. So we challenged them and said, well, actually, you don't mention any of the key points. They said, well, we haven't got anybody to talk to you, but they were happy to provide the 38 Degrees press release, which is on screen. You'll need to go to their site to read it. But basically, there is no story here. What's really going on is that 38 Degrees is using research by other people looking at the NHS, and they're hoovering up identities and that actual research. So no mention of what's really going on in the NHS. And of course, what's really happening is these change agents now are disrupting the NHS to create a situation where people are calling for further change. And I'll just say, let's remind ourselves of what we covered yesterday, where we had the Cabinet Office pushing this language in order to make sure this agenda comes through.
We'll be mentioning this Bridge Group report again a little later.
Yeah, well, this is serious stuff. Obviously, this is the medical care of the nation, which is now just degenerating into complete chaos. That is not accidental. The NHS has been destroyed from the inside by these leadership, future leaders and change agents. This is deliberate government policy. 38 Degrees, totally unaware, apparently.
Or not, maybe.
Or not.
Yes.
We'll come on to that another day.
So let's introduce you to Uprising. Uprising is developing the leaders of tomorrow. Uprising is a UK-wide youth leadership development organisation, apparently. It's aiming to open pathways to power for talented young people from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. And who's behind this lot? Well, they are an independent organisation, but who's promoting them? None other than Demos. And they have produced a report on Uprising. They're saying Uprising has an ambitious vision for social change. The organisation seeks to equip its participants, recruited from diverse backgrounds, with the knowledge, networks, skills and confidence to be effective leaders and change makers in society. As more people from underrepresented backgrounds ascend to positions of authority, leaders in the UK will better represent the country's growing diversity. So they're targeting young people. Demos measured the changes in Uprising participants' political and democratic engagement around the 2015 election. They discussed 4 key ingredients of success that Uprising attempts to develop, which is knowledge, networks, skills, and confidence. And they were basically saying that young people that have been through the leadership program run by Uprising appear to have led that leadership program appears to have led to positive outcomes in knowledge, network, skills and confidence for the 2014-15 cohort. And it says that, for example, 68% of young participants reported gaining employment from the program, directly from the program, with 1 in 5 of its alumni going on to set up social enterprise of their own or a business of their own. They say the unique program, which aims to establish pathways to powers for diverse or disadvantaged groups, connects young people with mentors and professional networks to help them to realise their leadership potential. So absolutely being promoted by Demos.
The word appears in there, Mike, is always a good one with these initiatives. It appears that this happened. It appears that these people got jobs.
Well, this is a very good point, because what's clear from the Demos report is that it's not scientific in any way, shape or form. They haven't looked at any kind of control group to see how people that have been through this leadership program perform compared to people that haven't, for example. And of course, what they will not be doing on a long-term basis is looking at the potential mental health implications of having been through a program like this.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not just this. Of course, is about social mobility and diversity and so on. And it's not just leadership for young people that is experiencing this type of program. Here is Sir Jeremy Haywood, head of the civil service, and he says that in a blog post today that the Prime Minister has said that the driving purpose of her government is to make Britain a country that works, for example, not just for the privileged few. The civil service, both in its role of supporting the government and as one of the country's largest employers, must be at the centre of this effort. He's saying that the civil service has long seen itself as a meritocratic organisation in which people, whatever their background, can rise to the top. And so what he's going to do is to run a data gathering exercise. He's already asked, as it says here in the quote, that's why earlier this week, John Manzoni, John Thompson and I wrote a joint letter to all senior civil servants asking them to complete an online survey on their socio-economic backgrounds. Data collection of this kind, the first by any major employer in the UK, will allow us to track the background of civil servants, or how the background of civil servants is changing over time. Some of the questions may make those taking the survey slightly uncomfortable, but I want to reassure everyone that data being collected is being collected and used anonymously in the same way as other diversity data. And of course, you've got to say, Brian, what is the purpose of this? It's quite clearly designed to make sure that what they describe as underrepresented minorities rise to the top. It's going to get rid of the traditional
civil
servant and replace them with what? Because this isn't just an attack on white, traditional white British civil servants. What they are doing, of course, is destroying all cultures, because they are turning everything into this mush, as you describe it. It's a kind of synergistic relationship.
It is, and the aim is, of course, that these people are going to go through the reframing process. This is what the Common Purpose course is. This is the training that we've already shown with the Bridge Group. And therefore, the civil servants will not think as normal people do in the rest of the country. These people are going to think in this hypnotic language, which effectively means that when a small number of people inject policy into this new civil service, they just carry on and do it. It doesn't matter whether people die in the hospitals or people die on the streets because they've got nowhere to sleep. These civil servants will do it. And I couldn't resist just coming back to the report we had yesterday. I just wondered whether Mr. Haywood would sign his letter, Mike, because he said that sent out this letter to his civil servants. Apparently he would sign it. But of course, when his civil servants write to members of the public, they don't want to sign their letters because that might actually reveal who or which of these future leaders is talking to us. So it's becoming quite clear we've got a new system of government. We don't want ordinary people with ordinary values participating. They're going to be screened out. That's what David Cameron was doing with his anybody who takes a position of power or importance in the Conservative Party will get a psychometric test. Screen out the people who are causing the trouble, bring in the cannon fodder, and as you say, Mike, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what colour or religion you are, they are going to use you. Well, I'll just put in this plea here before we move on to our next section, and that is that Melanie Shaw is really in desperate trouble at the moment. She has literally disappeared into HM Prison Foston Hall. She's not getting mail. She's not able to send mail out. She's not able to communicate with friends and very close supporters who've given her help and support and assisted with legal material. All of that has been stopped. by means of a court-appointed legal team that Melanie sacked, but that doesn't make any difference. They carry on. So we're going to say to you, this lady is in grave danger at the moment of being sectioned. We need as many people as possible to start getting those letters in, particularly to the governor of HMP Boston Hall. This is the individuals permitting this to happen. But of course, we've got Amber Rudd, the new Home Secretary, and Theresa May, our illustrious former Home Secretary. It does come down to people power. We've seen before when enough people do take the action, we get a result. So please, will you help on this? At the end of the day, could be any of us sat in that prison cell.
Right. Before we move on to Scottish situation, we'll just do a quick run through on Syria. The United Nations here has submitted its third report of the Joint Investigations Mechanism for Chemical Weapons Prohibition to the Security Council. And the press release here says that the Secretary General submitted the third report. The report outlines the in-depth investigation into the 9 selected cases of chemical weapons use and provides the findings, assessments and conclusions by the leadership panel. The methods of work and the investigation for the specific cases are described in the report's 10 annexes. But the key point here is that this report is not even released yet. It will be released on the 30th of August. And then will be made available to the public shortly thereafter. But that hasn't prevented, I guess they've seen early drafts of it perhaps, but that hasn't prevented Boris Johnson from saying that this UN report confirms for the first time what we've long believed: the Assad regime has been responsible for the use of chemical weapons in at least 2 attacks in Syria. It's not quite as clear cut as that, it should be said. And as I say, this report highlighting 9 and Johnson accusing the Syrian government of using chemical weapons on 2 occasions. Let's see what the Russians had to say. Well, because the Americans obviously echoing what Boris Johnson was saying. And the Lavrov here, as you can see, saying that the Americans and the British, should take a look in the mirror and do what they promised to do back in January, to separate the loyal opposition from the terrorists. They are currently unable or unwilling to do so, and I think it's unwilling that is the key point here. And we should also just highlight the comments made by Philip Giraldi, who's a former CIA officer. It's a good point he makes. I'd be very interested in seeing the sourcing of the information used in the report, because too often in the past it turned out that the opposition sources have contrived information to make it look like the government was responsible for an attack, and it turned out that this wasn't the case. So it remains to be seen just exactly what the evidence is for that. Certainly the hints that we've seen so far, Brian, suggest that allegations that government used chemical weapons, again, are sort of couched in the language of it seems, or maybe, or it's not quite definitive.
All of the reports were like that. It didn't matter which reports you looked at, whether they were from the UN or from Porton Down, from the US. They all claimed that these weapons had been used, but when you actually read the reports in detail, they always said possible, if, maybe. What I'm interested to know is, against the background of even more confused situation in Syria, where have you now got evidence that going back, whatever it is, 2-3 years, chemical weapons were used? Where'd you get the evidence for that in a war zone?
You take a survey, perhaps?
Take a survey,
yes.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Just
before we leave this subject, just to make the point that John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov are in Geneva today. If we can just put that up on screen, please, Theo, for talks. And, well, we'll see what comes out of that. The Russians very, very keen to try to encourage the Americans to get involved directly with them in dealing with ISIS. The Americans doing everything they can not to do so, because of course they don't want to bomb their own people. So we'll see what comes out of this. Probably nothing. Probably nothing. Okay, well, David, you're going to take us through some of the events around Police Scotland, and also a little bit of an update with the Docherty case. But I'm bringing up on screen here the Police Conduct Scotland regulations of 1996.
So those are just coming up now with the typewriter. Conduct constituting misconduct. There's some jolly good things in here. Insubordination. I'll just read a few and then I'll pass you over. Corrupt practice, breach of confidence, drinking, intoxicating liquor, suppression of complaints. That's a very interesting one. Disorderly conduct. Acting towards or treating any person in an oppressive or inappropriate manner. And we'll just have a look at page 2. Here we are. And we got failure to comply without good or sufficient cause with a lawful order, neglect of duty, malingering, being absence from duty. You're hitting quite hard on this little selection of what police conduct in Scotland should be. This is not what we're finding in the Docherty or indeed other cases.
Yes, we have here, this is the current regulations. We have a more traditional, older common law requirement to not commit a crime called breach of duty in Scots law, which is the equivalent to malfeasance in public office in England. But it's quite an interesting list. Neglect of duty is on that list. So it's misconduct to neglect duty. And suppression of complaints was a very interesting one. So there are standards. Now, what we're seeing is a strange split in Police Scotland. We're seeing some officers conducting themselves extremely well, and we're seeing an element within Police Scotland working, it would appear, to another agenda. And a lot of officers seem to be very unhappy about this element within the police that seems to be working as though that list does not exist, or in fact is a series of instructions.
This is a very important change in what we're seeing, and we'll call it the field in the field. A lot of people have got this impression that all police officers are bad. We've obviously fought that for some time. It's clearly not the case. But what has been true is there seems to have been a reluctance of police officers to actually speak out when they know something is wrong. And it does now seem around the Docherty case that something has drastically changed, because people are coming forward with information, but at the same time they're showing that they are themselves scared of other elements within the police. It's almost like, we'll use the term with a very small b, that there's a black ops section to police north of the border. We know this is going on in the Met Police as well, a sort of internal thuggery who have been driving policy. But it is encouraging that we've now got people speaking out. But just take us through. We're just going to put this is Hot Fuzz, if you're not sure. We've got a picture of some police up in Scotland at a fun day. And we're just going to bring up this gentleman. Now, there's been something funny going on around the name of this policeman, Sergeant Sam Buchan. What can you tell us? And we've got to be accurate here. At the moment, we're looking at basically people, police officers, perfectly good reputation, all of them. What's going on around the use of the Buchan name?
Well, there are several identity issues that have been difficult surrounding the Docherty case. And essentially, as we've been investigating the allegations made by the Dochertys, everything we've managed to check has checked out, with one or two exceptions. And in those cases, the truth has proven to be stranger and more concerning than even the Dochertys knew, and they've been surprised at what we have in fact uncovered. Now, one of the key players in this was understood by the Docherty family to be Sergeant Sam Buchan. I'll just read a quick extract from what Brian Docherty said about him. He said, "Well, we lived in Fraserburgh and Peterhead at the time on the Viscount's estate. It was slightly closer, I'd say, to Fraserburgh, so it was local. I called this hotline 101, the standard line, and they put me in touch with a local officer called Sergeant Sam Buchan." He then goes on to outline what this officer did. He organised an interview with two officers described as ideal, who transpired to be very inexperienced. As that interview was going on, Sergeant Buchan was in another police office with Alan Lowe, who'd approached and offered money to the Docherty family, and Viscount Petersham. That was only discovered later, but that's what was going on. And then the very next day, so within 24 hours, the sergeant was at the door saying to the Docherty family, "What can I do to persuade you there's nothing to see here?" And later on, they found, when social services descended upon them, they eventually uncovered that the reason this happened was a report went from Police Scotland to social services. When the officer that authored that report was confronted, it transpired that the report that was submitted was not her report, was submitted when she was on vacation, and was submitted by Sergeant Buchan. So it seemed as Sergeant Sam Buchan was at the core of a great many of the problems. So we started to look into information about him and who he might be, but what came out was a quite different picture. We found nothing to his discredit. We found his reputation in the local community was very high, and we found him running marathons and raising money for charity, and would appear a very happy family life, and there didn't seem to be any connection between the two pictures. So when we took the photographic evidence that we got from mainstream media sources, he's Sergeant Sam Buchan has headed up several public campaigns in the northeast that have been run by Police Scotland to get kids off of drugs and things like this. So his face is in the paper. So we showed it to the Docherty family, and they were quite clear. No, that's not him. That's definitely not him. Sergeant Buchan was older, he had grey hair, he had completely different features. No, that's definitely not him. So what appears to have happened is they were talking to Sergeant Sam Buchan. They were talking to a Police Scotland officer of sergeant rank or wearing a sergeant's uniform. But it wasn't Sergeant Sam Buchan. So that strikes us as a very odd state of affairs, and it raises quite a few questions. We have this officer who seems to be without anything to compromise his good name, and yet his name was put into the frame for all of the wrongdoing that was surrounding the Docherty family. The Dochertys had no idea about this. So we wonder, who has been passing himself off as Sam Buchan and why? Why did there was a police complaints procedure that the Dochertys initiated, and then there was 2 investigations by PIRC, the Police Investigation and Review Commissioner. None of these internal investigations highlighted to the Dochertys that they were naming the wrong officer. It didn't seem to be picked up at all, which seems extremely odd if the investigations were thorough and competent. And most of all, we want to know who framed Sam Buchan.
And you've mentioned 2 really serious things. You've mentioned that a report was submitted in the name of one constable when, I think it was a lady, she was on holiday. Very serious, because that is basically that's fraud within the record system from the police. And then we've got what appears to be misuse of somebody's name whilst interacting with a member of the public. So these are very serious breaches. And of course, the other point that's coming out of this is that perfectly decent police constables there north of the border are actually being brought into disrepute by the action of a few of their colleagues.
Well, quite. The officer, PC Catherine Lamont, was the author of that report. And when she was questioned about it by Brian Docherty, she was initially quite hostile and then perplexed. She said, "I'll phone you back." She phoned back less than an hour later and offered to come and see Mr. Docherty with her police union rep. So clearly she was very concerned at the position she had been placed in.
Yeah.
And the report that had gone into social services was 180 degrees in another direction from the one she had written. Rather than highlighting the concerns about the paedophile.
So this is, David, sorry to interject there, this is falsification of evidence, isn't it?
Absolutely. It was telling the social services to lock on to the Docherty family, and that's where the problem was. So it completely changed the nature of the report. It wasn't a tweak, it wasn't anything minor, it was night and day.
Right. Well, if we go to the top of Police Scotland, maybe this headline says it all, which is that they're apparently worried they've broken the law. This is Chief Constable Philip Gormley, the man at the top now. And I just found this, well, laughable, but of course it's black humour, because they're worried that because they've been participating in the named person scheme, the Guardian plan, they could have broken the law. So we've got Police Scotland in a bit of a tiz here, David.
Asking the Scottish Government to reassure them that they are compliant with the requirements of the European Convention on Human Rights. You would hope, I would have thought in my naivety, that Police Scotland might have been able to form a robust and independent view on whether they're actually breaking the law.
Before they acted. Before they acted is the key thing.
Before they acted. And the suggestion here is that something might have changed. That going forward, are we breaking the law? Are we compliant? But of course, that's not the question. The question is, we've been rolling this out for the last 3-4 years in huge swathes of Scotland, affecting hundreds of thousands of families. If we have been breaking the European Convention on Human Rights and the Data Protection Act, what position does that put Police Scotland in? Presumably, legally, it's not very good. In terms of claims, it might be not very good. In terms of public confidence, catastrophic potentially.
Well, if we have a look at the sort of confidence in the police, who is training them? We've shown this before, but it was some time ago. Let's bring her up on screen. Who do we have running police training? We've got Professor Shirley Pearce, CBE, a clinical psychologist, an independent, so-called independent chair of the College of Policing. Why do we need a psychologist running policing? And if we just have a look at this, to achieve our ambition, we will extend our networks beyond the traditional boundaries of policing. Does that mean falsifying internal reports and misrepresenting yourself to the public? Is that leading beyond authority that she's encouraging here? It's quite remarkable, isn't it? And then we've got the same attitude coming up in the Scottish Government. Now, you produced these excellent articles here. We've got the named person provision has been suspended. That's reported Holyrood, and of course the man in the picture is John Sweeney. But at the same time, Holyrood is going to push ahead with the named person plan. So we don't know whether it's unlawful. The police don't know whether it's lawful, but the government's going to push ahead with it, so they're above the law.
This is a plan that Aidan O'Neill, the QC for the No to Name Person campaign, described memorably as doing my head in. It's like wrestling with an octopus. Well, it remains an octopus because it is suspended and pushing ahead simultaneously.
It's suspended, it's being pushed ahead. It's unlawful. No, it's not unlawful. Well, it gets better because parents have now got to cooperate. It's those nasty parents. So this was a headline here which you brought across the Press and Journal. Parents must cooperate for the Guardian scheme to be effective. So Mr. Sweeney says those very nasty parents that won't cooperate, they're horrible, despicable people. They must. But we also need the abusers. This Guardian scheme won't work if the abusers opt out. My head was in a spin at this point, David.
Oh, it's ridiculous. We have to. It's got to be voluntary because Nicola Sturgeon has promised us it's voluntary, and it requires everyone to cooperate because if the abusers don't cooperate, then the scheme doesn't work, and you're just left monitoring closely the 99% of parents who actually do look after their kids, and not doing and spending all of your resources on that, and not having anything left for the odd small number that are actually dangerous and neglectful or abusive. And this is meant to require cooperation. And Mr. Swinney says it was based on cooperation. It was based on nothing of the sort. It was based on it's happening whether you want it or not. You're a minion, know your place. It's what it was based on. And since the Supreme Court has pointed out that that's unlawful, what are we getting now? We don't know. All of the inconsistencies and contradictions based upon that's involved in this octopus-like legislation are now being shown in all of their unseemly glory to the Scottish public. The Press and Journal had an opinion piece, and the conclusion of which was this scheme should be scrapped, and scrapped now. And that's very much the view that most thinking people in Scotland are taking, but not Mr. Swinney. We cannot, I think the phrase is, this organisation does not tolerate failure, Brian. I think that seems to be the policy.
Well, I'm going to sum it up by saying we've got a Scottish government that appears to have brought in legislation which is against the law. They've broken the law, and the same Scottish government just uses the police and social services to come along and steal 4 of your children. So Scottish government, this is not a government, this is a fiefdom. It's a criminal fiefdom, and it's now clearly above the law. On that note, David, we'll say thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to say a few words to viewers on what they need to do, but thank you for joining us, and we'll leave events north of the border there. Well, let's get on to a more heartwarming subject, which is furry creatures. And to preserve anonymity in line with Home Office procedures, I've removed details of the donor, but we've left the furry pussycat. We just wanted to say thank you very much to the person who donated with this little sticker, and also to other people that are donating to the UK column. We do need your help, and we can only do what we do if you take out subscriptions or donations. Well, I'm going to say, please have a very good weekend. If the weather's fine, I hope people will be out away from the dark subjects and relaxing. But we really do ask that you use material that we are putting out. Each UK column news covers a wide variety of subjects. What would we like you to do? Pick up on one subject, talk to people, disseminate it, email it, tweet it, and challenge the organisations that we are pointing fingers at. That's why we're putting the base of evidence out there. It's more than sitting and enjoying a programme and a chat. We're here to say, unless we stop this beast installing itself, what you see happening in children, a criminal government out of control, same criminal type government in Westminster, it won't be long before everything is stripped from us. Can a few million emails make a difference? I actually think they can, but it requires a lot of people to act. That's it.
We are not here on Monday.
Correct. Bank holiday. Monday. We are recharging UK column batteries, so no news on Monday, and we'll be back on Tuesday. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.